Hey everybody, the purpose of this video is to get you some solutions to the hypothesis test quiz about stating type 1 and type 2 errors. This is something we're going to be doing the rest of the class together, so this is just some extra practice. Here's the page in the book, 396, and the problems, it refers back to problem number 1. The one I wanted you to look at was problem number 2. It says for A through J above, state the type 1 and type 2 errors in complete sentences. And I said skip A, C, D, and I because I think those ones are given to you in the back of the book. So yeah, these solutions on page 417 or 418. So we'll grab one of the other ones here. Let's do what I say, A, C, D, and I. Let's do B. At most 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections. At most 60%. That means the hypothesis that we'd be testing would be no more than 60%, which means the percentage we're testing is less than or equal to 60%. Now we'll keep it verbal for right now, but if we were doing an official hypothesis test, the research hypothesis would be P is less than or equal to 60, because at most 60 means you can't get any higher. So type 1 error would be, yes, we believe that. We believe that no more than 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections, because our study said that. If we were wrong, the error would be, in fact, more than 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections. In other words, we got data that was deviant through whatever reason, whether it was sampling error or whether it was non-sampling error. But the way to be wrong would be saying at most 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections when at least more, or when in fact, not when at least, sorry about that. When at most, let me start again. I hit the mouse and then it right-clicked. So the type 1 error would be saying at most 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections when in fact more than 60% vote. Type 2 error would be disagreeing with this statement. In other words, getting data that resulted in a big p-value, capital P-value, and saying, you know what, we can't support this hypothesis, so we're going to say that, you know what, more than 60% of Americans vote in presidential elections, when in fact, no more than 60% do. So that would be the type 2 error, false negative. In other words, looking for a change and not seeing it, but the change actually occurred and we didn't see it. We'll grab one more of these. Let's go to the very end. Private universities cost, on average, more than $20,000 for tuition. All right. Ooh, let me get the thing highlighted properly. There we go. Okay, so it's a more than and it's an average. So if you're using symbols, you'd be saying mu is bigger than 20,000. Mu bigger than 20,000. A type 1 error would be saying, yes, we do agree with this. We agree with this hypothesis that private universities do cost more than 20,000 years for tuition. $20,000 per year for tuition, when in fact they don't. They cost less on average than $20,000. That's one possible way of phrasing a type 1 error. The idea is you believe this when in fact it's wrong. That's a type 1 false positive, and that could be due to any number of reasons. It could be deviant data. It could be an outlier. A very expensive school mixed into the sample would drive the average up artificially. So that's two ways of looking at it. A type 2 would be saying, you know what, our sample doesn't show this. It shows that private universities don't cost more than $20,000 a year for tuition. But if it was a type 2 error, a false negative, that would mean that they actually do cost more, but we missed it. So, and then in class, I'll have you always discuss which one you think is worse and why. So I'm going to leave that as an open question because you all have varying different opinions on that, and I love them all. But depending on the context, false positives and false negatives they can have lasting / different consequences depending on the context. So anyway, I hope seeing B and J allow you to understand how to do the rest of them, and I hope it helped. And we click off over here.